Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hi, I'm Oliver.
Hi, I'm Lily.
Welcome to Science in Easy English.
With Oliver and Lily.
Why do smells trigger memories?
Usually when you think about memory, it feels like flipping through a mental photo album.
Right, like a very conscious process.
Exactly. You see a picture of your old house and you logically recall living there. It's structured.
It makes sense.
But then, you're just walking down the street on a random Tuesday, minding your own business,
Yeah.
and you catch this passing whiff of a highly specific brand of sunscreen, or maybe the smell of damp asphalt right after a summer rain.
Oh, or a box of old crayons.
Yes. And that photo album just vanishes. You don't just remember being 7 years old. You are violently, physically transported back to that exact moment in time.
The entire logical framework of your brain just gets completely hijacked.
It really does. It's not a casual recollection at all.
No, it's this full body, immersive time travel experience. It completely bypasses your rational mind and just drops you straight into the emotional reality of your past.
And it is so hyper-specific to each person.
It really is. So today, the mission of this deep dive into the sources is to figure out the exact biological backdoor that allows this phenomenon to happen.
We have a really diverse stack of materials today to get through.
Yeah, we're looking at everything from neurobiology reviews and historical cognitive models to cutting-edge clinical trials.
And even a Reddit explain, like, I'm 5-thread.
Right. We're going to unpack how the brain's nightclub bouncer gets skipped entirely by your nose, how this incredibly unique biological quirk kept our ancient ancestors alive, and how scientists are now actively hacking this scent memory connection.
Hacking it to reverse cognitive decline and fight disease while you sleep.
It's wild. But to make sense of the clinical treatments happening right now, we really have to look at the architectural blueprint of the human brain.
We do. Because the way we process an odor is fundamentally structurally different from how we process a visual image or a sound.
Yeah, going through the anatomical research in our sources, I kept picturing the brain as this highly exclusive, heavily guarded nightclub.
I love that analogy.
Right. Think of all your incoming senses as people trying to get inside the club. Sight, sound, touch. They all have to wait in this massive line outside.
Just waiting to get in.
Exactly. Before they can even get close to the dance floor, they have to present their ID to the bouncer.
And in the human brain, that bouncer is the thalamus.
Right.
It acts as the central switchboard for sensory input. When you see something or hear something, the thalamus receives that raw data.
It checks the ID.
Exactly. It filters it, processes it, and then meticulously routes it to the correct department in the cerebral cortex.
So that you can consciously perceive and analyze it.
Right. But smell does not wait in line.
No, smell is the ultimate VIP.
It doesn't even look at the bouncer.
It just walks right past. Odor molecules hit the receptors inside your nose, and the electrical signal takes a completely unmonitored, direct backdoor route.
Straight past the thalamus.
Right under the dance floor.
The physical layout is actually staggering when you look at a brain scan. The olfactory bulb, which processes those smells in the nasal cavity, sends its signals directly into the limbic system.
It plugs straight in.
Directly into the amygdala, which is the command center for your emotions.
And the hippocampus.
Right, which handles your memory formation. No other sense gets this kind of unrestricted, unfiltered access.
Zero logical filtration. You just go straight from a chemical particle in the air to an overwhelming feeling.
And a deeply entrenched memory.
But, I mean, why? If the brain went through the trouble of evolving this highly complex thalamus to keep our senses organized and filtered.
Why leave this one glaring back door wide open?
Exactly. Why is smell the VIP?
Well, the answer goes back to the absolute earliest days of evolution. Harvard researcher Sandeep Robert Data refers to this specific limbic setup as the original brain.
The original brain.
Yeah. Long before creatures had complex language or abstract thought or, advanced visual processing, they essentially needed 3 basic functions working in perfect harmony just to survive.
Which were?
They needed a sense of smell, a system for spatial navigation, and a system for memory.
So early survival was Basically just mapping the world through your nose.
Pretty much. Think about the mechanics of being a really early organism.
Yeah.
You have to map your surroundings purely to stay alive.
Right. You need to remember the exact location of the food source.
And you need to remember the exact location of the predator you narrowly escaped yesterday.
Oh, that's crucial.
So scent, spatial navigation, and memory were fused together into one hardwired loop.
That makes a lot of sense.
If you smell a predator approaching, your amygdala needs to flood your body with instant terror right then and there.
And your hippocampus needs to instantly recall the layout of the environment so you can run.
Exactly. If that smell had to be routed through a thalamic committee to consciously ponder the situation,
You would be eaten.
you would be eaten immediately.
Okay, that makes perfect sense for an ancient creature. But it raises a massive question for me.
What's that?
If smell is this foundational life or death survival tool that built the original brain, why are humans seemingly so terrible at it?
Whoa.
Because we think of animals having these superpower noses, right?
Yeah.
My dog can smell a piece of drop cheese from 3 rooms away.
Yeah.
Humans feel totally detached from our noses by comparison.
The data actually challenges that assumption completely.
Really?
Yeah, humans have a remarkable olfactory discrimination capabilities. If you look at the human genome, the single largest gene family we possess is dedicated entirely to olfactory receptors.
With the largest gene family in our entire DNA.
It is massive. The crucial difference between us and your dog or wild animals isn't the physical ability to detect an odor.
Okay, then what is it?
It's how we assign meaning to that odor. Biologists classify humans as evolutionary generalists.
Meaning we adapt to live in almost any environment on Earth.
Exactly. Contrast a human with a specialist species like a giant panda.
Okay. A panda lives in a very specific bamboo forest and eats a very specific diet. Because their environment is static, it's highly adaptive for a panda to be born with innate, hardwired scent associations.
So they instinctively know what their food smells like from birth.
Right. But humans live in the Arctic tundra, the scorching desert, dense jungles, and, modern concrete cities.
Oh, I see. So if we were hardwired with specific scent meanings, it would actually be a disadvantage.
Exactly.
Like a berry that smells sweet and means delicious food in the jungle might share a scent profile with a deadly poisonous plant in the desert.
And that forces the human brain to rely on associative learning. We are largely blank slates when it comes to odor.
Oh, wow.
Unlike taste, where we're born knowing that sweet means high-calorie energy and intensely bitter might mean poison, our smell responses are learned.
So we have to build the associations ourselves.
Right. Whenever you encounter a totally new odor, your brain captures the emotional state you're in, the physical context of your surroundings, and that specific scent, and binds them all together permanently. Every single time we smell something novel, the brain writes a permanent line of code linking that chemical to that exact moment.
Exact.
Which explains why my grandmother's perfume doesn't just smell like flowers to me. It literally smells like comfort and safety.
That associative coding is the foundation of what psychologists call the Proust phenomenon.
Named after the French novelist Marcel Proust, right?
Yes.
Our sources highlight that famous scene in his novel, Swan's Way. The narrator dips a Madeleine biscuit into a cup of linden tea, and the sheer aroma of it completely overtakes him.
With this intense, euphoric wave of childhood nostalgia.
Right. He stops being an adult for a second and is completely submerged in his past.
It's the defining literary description of odor-evoked autobiographical memory. And cognitive scientists actually developed a framework to explain the mechanics of this phenomenon.
The lover model.
Yes, the lover model.
L-O-V-E-R.
Yeah.
Let's break down what those letters actually represent because it explains so much about our daily experience.
The acronym stands for limbic, old, vivid, emotional, and rare.
Okay, so we already covered the limbic aspect, that VIP pathway to the amygdala.
Right. The memories feel vivid, they are highly emotional, and the triggers are rare.
Because you usually don't encounter the smell of your specific kindergarten classroom every day, which keeps the association pristine.
Exactly. But the old component is perhaps the most fascinating. Odor-evoked memories heavily skew toward the very first decade of your life.
Which is so different from our visual or verbal memories, right?
Very different.
Usually people have a reminiscence bump for regular memories that cluster around their late teens and 20s when they're forming their adult identity. But scent memories peak in childhood.
Because that first decade is when you were encountering the world's odors for the very first time. You are a generalist, furiously mapping your environment.
Deciding what is safe, what is joyful, and what is dangerous.
And the scent marketing data in our sources perfectly illustrates how sticky these early associations are.
Oh yeah, the Crayola study.
Studies show that 85% of people vividly remember their childhood just by catching the scent of Crayola crayons.
85% of the population. That is a staggering statistic.
It really is.
I mean, millions of people walking around with a massive shared cultural memory lying completely dormant in their limbic system, just waiting for someone to pop the lid off a box of wax.
The power of that trigger is undeniable. But for a long time, the scientific community struggled to prove if scent memories were objectively better than other types of memory.
Because the testing methodology is really tricky, right?
Very tricky.
If I hand you a bottle of sunscreen and ask, what memory does this trigger? The physical smell of the coconut and the chemicals might naturally steer you toward a beach memory.
Whereas a generic question might not.
Right. You're confounding the prompt with the memory itself.
So to solve that, researchers Rachel Hurst and Jonathan Schooler designed this brilliant study in 2002. They completely unconfounded the selection process from the retrieval process.
How do they do that?
First, they brought participants into a lab and gave them a purely verbal cue. They would say a word like copper tone or Play-Doh or Vicks Vapor Rub.
Okay, so the participant hears the word Play-Doh and actively selects a specific memory of, like, playing at their kitchen table when they were 5.
Exactly. They write it down, they rate how emotional it is, and they rate how vivid the details are.
And then what?
Much later, the researchers brought those same people back. But this time, they either showed them a visual picture of the item, like a photograph of the yellow Play-Doh can, or they exposed them to the actual physical smell of the Play-Doh.
And asked them to recall that exact same kitchen table memory again.
Yes.
And the results are just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
When the participants were exposed to the physical smell, the memory didn't just return, it mutated.
It became drastically more emotional.
They reported a profoundly stronger sensation of being completely brought back to the original event compared to when they just saw the picture.
It provided the first unequivocal empirical proof that the biological act of smelling a cue dramatically amplifies the emotional intensity of the recollection.
The visual cue didn't do it. The verbal cue didn't do it. Only the VIP pathway of smell turned the emotional volume up to a 10.
Exactly.
But hold on, let me push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Looking closely at that Hurst study, there's a massive, almost unsettling contradiction. The smells undeniably made people feel more brought back. They got that intense rush of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
But the data showed it didn't actually increase the objective accuracy or the specific factual details of the memory.
Right.
They didn't remember the color of the kitchen table any better. So, are scent memories actually higher quality, or is the brain just hyping us up? Are we just being fooled by our own feelings?
That is the ultimate cognitive illusion.
An illusion.
Yeah. The emotional loudness you experience is a biological reality. Your amygdala is genuinely firing on all cylinders, releasing real neurochemicals.
But the factual detail.
That's an illusion. The intense wash of emotion tricks your brain into feeling overly confident about the clarity of the memory.
Oh, I see.
Because you feel like you are standing right there in the past. Your brain assumes you must remember every factual detail perfectly, even if the actual resolution of the memory is quite low.
Wow. That completely flips how we understand our own nostalgia.
It really does.
The emotion is authentic, but the facts are hazy. And if these deep-rooted scent associations are driven by emotional learning rather than objective reality, it makes you wonder, can we actively manipulate them?
Oh, absolutely.
Can we overwrite the illusion?
The research shows we definitely can. Top-down processing, meaning the context your conscious brain applies to a situation, can completely override the bottom-up sensory data coming through your nose.
Oh, right, the 2001 study.
Yes. A fascinating study from 2001 proved this by using identical chemical odors.
I love this experiment because it is so visceral. Imagine I hand you a vial to sniff. If I label that vial Parmesan cheese, you take a smell, your mouth waters, and you rate it as highly pleasant.
But if I hand you the exact same vial with the exact same chemical composition,
And I change the label to vomit.
you physically gag.
Yeah, the participants found it repulsive.
The chemical molecules hitting the olfactory receptors didn't change for a single second. The only thing that changed was the story the brain was telling itself about what those molecules meant.
So a simple verbal label can change our perception of a smell. But what happens when the association is tied to something much heavier than cheese?
Right.
What happens when a smell is tied to deep emotional trauma?
That brings us to some of the most groundbreaking neurobiology in the entire stack of sources, the work of Dr. Kerry Ressler.
Yes.
His team looked at fear conditioning in mice, and they discovered that the connection between scent and trauma doesn't just change an emotional association. It literally physically alters the hardware of the brain.
Because they used a classic fear conditioning model, right?
Right. They exposed the mice to a very specific odor and simultaneously gave them a mild foot shock.
So the mice quickly learned that the smell equaled pain.
But Ressler's team didn't just observe the behavioral fear, they examined the neuroanatomy of the mice's noses and brains, and they found that the brains had physically mutated.
Mutated how?
The mice grew entirely new neurons in their nasal cavities that were specifically tuned to detect that exact odor.
They built new biological radar dishes just for that threat.
Exactly. Furthermore, the glomeruli, which are the spherical clusters of nerve cells in the olfactory bulb that process incoming scent signals, physically expanded in size.
So they devoted more processing power, more anatomical real estate, to detecting the thing that hurt them.
Yes. And the Reddit explains, like 5thread in our sources brought up the most staggering part of this.
Oh, the epigenetic inheritance part.
Yes. These fear associations, these literal physical expansions of the brain's hardware, can be inherited across 2 generations.
That is wild. The offspring of those traumatized mice, who had never once been shocked in their lives, were born already terrified of that specific smell.
And they were born with the expanded brain anatomy to detect it.
It's a profound example of epigenetic inheritance. If a parent learns that a specific scent means lethal danger, passing down that biological warning system is an incredible evolutionary advantage.
It really is. But the true breakthrough of Ressler's work isn't just the trauma, it's the reversal of it.
The extinction therapy.
Yes, extinction therapy.
Meaning they took the traumatized mice, put them in a safe, comfortable environment, and exposed them to the triggering odor without any foot shocks, over and over again.
And the mice slowly learned that the context had changed. The smell no longer meant danger.
And incredibly, their brain anatomy responded.
The extra neurons vanished. The expanded glomeruli physically shrank back to their normal baseline size.
The hardware unwired itself.
It did.
Let's just pause on the implications of that for a second. If trauma literally builds new hardware in our olfactory system, and safe exposure literally dismantles that hardware, we can actively hack our own bad memories.
We can.
If you have a scent that triggers severe anxiety, you could theoretically overwrite that biological code by deliberately smelling it while engaging in a deeply joyful, safe activity. You can force the hardware to shrink.
That is the sheer power of neuroplasticity, because the olfactory system has that direct VIP access to the limbic system. It's uniquely structurally malleable.
And researchers are now taking this concept of hacking our neuroplasticity out of the trauma labs and applying it directly to global brain health and aging.
This is where the deep dive transitions from fascinating biology to incredibly urgent, actionable advice for the listener.
Yeah, because according to neurobiologist Dr. Michael Leon, Our modern lifestyle is fundamentally starving our brains.
Think about the sensory environment humanity evolved in. For hundreds of thousands of years, our waking lives were a chaotic, rich tapestry of complex natural odors.
Plant life, weather changes, wildlife, wood smoke.
The olfactory bulb was receiving a constant, heavy workout. But today, we spend our lives in affluent, sanitized, climate-controlled boxes.
We sit in sterile, scentless office buildings. We stare at odorless digital screens for 10 hours a day. We have engineered the smell out of our lives.
And Dr. Leon's research argues that this chronic lack of olfactory stimulation is doing severe, measurable damage to our cognitive networks.
Because the limbic system operates on a use it or lose it principle.
Exactly. Starving the brain of varied smells is directly correlated with memory loss, cognitive decline, and depression.
And the clinical statistics on this are terrifying. Failing a simple odor identification test, where a doctor asks you to identify the smell of an orange or a piece of leather, is now considered a massive red flag.
A huge red flag. Failing that test predicts a four-fold increase in 5-year mortality for older adults.
A four-fold increase. It's one of the earliest, most reliable warning signs for neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
That's because the olfactory bulb and its direct pathways to the memory centers are often the very first anatomical structures to deteriorate when neurodegeneration begins.
Losing your sense of smell is essentially the brain's check engine light flashing on the dashboard.
But Dr. Leon didn't just identify the problem. His team engineered a wildly innovative solution.
The overnight olfactory enrichment study.
Yes. This is a brilliant practical application of everything we've discussed. They took a group of older adults and placed a simple scent diffuser in their bedrooms.
Okay.
The diffuser was programmed to cycle through 7 different natural essential oils, rotating a new scent each night for 2 hours while the participants slept.
So the participants didn't have to practice anything, memorize anything, or change their daily habits. It was entirely passive overnight smelling.
Entirely passive, and the biological results were astounding. This passive exposure literally modified the physical structure of their uncinate fasciculus.
The uncinate fasciculus. We need to define exactly what that is and why modifying it is such a huge deal.
It's a major white matter tract in the human brain. You can visualize it as a thick, insulated superhighway that connects the amygdala, the emotion center we've been talking about, directly to the prefrontal cortex.
Which handles your complex decision-making and memory recall.
Exactly. As we age, and particularly in the early stages of Alzheimer's, the insulation on this highway degrades. The traffic slows down.
But the diffuser therapy physically strengthened this pathway.
It halted the degradation. As a result, the participants' cognitive and memory scores skyrocketed.
It's brilliant. Because smell has that VIP back door directly to the memory center. Pumping odors into the room while they sleep is like strapping their hippocampus to a treadmill.
Yes.
You're forcing the brain to do targeted resistance training while the conscious mind is completely powered down.
The efficiency of it is remarkable. And the benefits don't just stop at improving your sense of smell. Another major clinical trial in our sources proved that the benefits are cross-modal.
The Mind Your Nose, or MYN study.
Right. They found that engaging in daily odor memory training actually transferred to massive improvements in visual memory tasks.
Meaning, working out the nose strengthens the entire overarching memory network of the brain. It's like doing squats to improve your whole body cardiovascular health.
Precisely. The effects ripple outward. And the physical health benefits extend deeply into the immune system, too.
Oh, right, the inflammation study.
Another fascinating study monitored patients' blood work while they smelled a highly nostalgic, personally happy scent.
You know what happened?
The simple act of smelling something joyful significantly lowered systemic inflammatory markers in their blood, specifically proteins called TNF-alpha and interferon gamma.
Those are major immune system alarms, right? When those proteins are elevated chronically, it causes systemic inflammation, which is linked to everything from arthritis to brain fog.
Yes. Smelling a comforting scent physically slowed down their breathing, reduced their heart rate, and told the immune system to stand down and stop producing inflammatory proteins.
It proves that the mind-body connection isn't some abstract wellness metaphor.
No, it's a harsh biological reality governed by the limbic system. Calm the nose, and you literally calm the systemic cellular inflammation of the entire body.
When we step back and look at the whole arc of this deep dive, the mechanics of it are just awe-inspiring.
They really are.
We started with the anatomy, how smell sneaks past the brain's bouncer, the thalamus, and takes that VIP route straight to the amygdala and hippocampus.
We broke down the Proust phenomenon, realizing that the overwhelming rush of childhood nostalgia is actually an evolutionary tool for mapping our environment.
Even if the intense emotion sometimes tricks us into believing the memory is more factually accurate than it really is.
And we saw the immense neuroplasticity of this system, the fact that traumatic smells can physically expand the brain's processing hubs, and that safe, deliberate exposure can literally shrink them back down.
Or finally, the urgent realization that our modern sterile world is starving these ancient pathways. Failing to feed our noses is degrading the very white matter highways that keep our memories intact.
It's a stark reminder that no matter how advanced our technology gets, we remain deeply biological creatures, fundamentally tethered to the chemical reality of our environment.
Which leaves us with a really provocative thought to end on. Humanity is migrating further and further into highly sanitized, purely digital environments.
We're spending hours wearing scentless virtual reality headsets,
Scrolling through odorless social media feeds, and living in perfectly filtered air. If smell is the foundational anchor for human emotion, empathy, and memory, are we accidentally starving our limbic systems?
what happens to our shared humanity in a world that completely forgets to breathe it in?
If the original brain was built on scent, a scentless world might be quietly dismantling the very architecture of who we are.
It's a heavy thought.
Something to think about. Next time you walk past a local bakery, or smell damp asphalt after a storm, or pop the lid off an old box of crayons, do not just ignore it.
Take a deep, deliberate breath.
Let yourself be transported. You're not just indulging in nostalgia. You are giving your brain exactly the kind of workout it evolved to need, keeping your hardware strong, keeping your body healthy, and keeping your most precious memories alive.